Hello, everybody, and welcome to the last part of the Whatcast's look at hot takes for the Magore's Fiends expansion. So this time around, we're going to be looking at the Universal Ploys that are available in Magore's Fiends. And just previously, we looked at the Universal Ploys that were available in the sister expansion to this, the Farce Riders. And they were so good and so game breaking that I lost my damn mind. So I'm hoping for really good things from this particular set. Now, again, as I've said before, this is always my favorite part of looking at new expansions because I feel like the Universal cards definitely have the greatest impact on the meta, and they do the most to help us kind of come up with new gameplay mechanics, new strategies that we can play, and they also come in and affect older strategies to keep a balanced meta. And I think the ploys are kind of some of the most exciting benefits within the game. The ploy mechanic, it can cause so much change and so much, not necessarily randomness, but so much dynamism within the game. This is always what's most interesting to me. So without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, first one is Flickering Steppe. Roll 8 dice, choose a friendly fighter, and push them up to a number of hexes equal to the number of critical hits rolled. Okay. So on paper, and as a first impression, this card is meant to look very strong. But I think it's actually a bit of a trap. Yes, occasionally you'll have a situation where you're going to roll, 3 or 4 critical hits and be able to zoom right across the battlefield. But statistically, if you roll 8 dice, you're going to get about 2 critical hits. Sometimes more, sometimes less. But what I don't like about this card is the random element, and especially because it's dealing with movement. If I'm going to move to a place, and if I'm going to move to a place, if my move to that place is so important that I need to spend a ploy on it, then before I do this, I probably have an exact location in mind that I want to move my character to. I don't want to leave that to chance. Now, that being said, sometimes you just need to move 3+ hexes, and there aren't really a lot of cards or effects in the game that will allow you to do that. I would say this is probably not one of your staples for movement shenanigans, but I can see including it as the last of your movement shenanigans, just for the odd case where you really need to get somebody out of dodge or onto an objective. Statistically, again, you're going to get 2 point something critical hits out of 8 dice. So there is a pretty odd chance of getting 3. I wouldn't expect getting any more than 4. Otherwise, it's okay. Very situational, as I've said before. Grapple. I'm just gonna call this the Brohug card, and nobody can stop me. You can't stop me. Games Workshop can't stop me. This is the Brohug card. Reaction. Play this after an adjacent enemy fighter makes an attack action that drives a friendly fighter back. Push the attacker into the hex the friendly fighter was driven back from. Okay. I can definitely see this being very useful in any deck where your core strategy is going to be doing a lot of melee damage. Because being driven back, like, this is kind of a counter to defensive oriented decks that just want to get you away from them. You want to stick with somebody so that you don't have to expend a move action to get back into place or use a movement shenanigan to push them back into place. Ideally, you just want to stand where you are and spend that action to attack. And again, the attack action is the most efficient action within the game because it expends the fewest resources. In fact, I would say this is probably a situation where if you're playing something like Fire Slayers, Magore's Fiends, Iron Jaws, this kind of situation is going to come up a lot. So this is definitely worth a place in your deck. If you're playing a very high mobility faction, or one in which you're more defensive rather than aggressive, probably less useful for you. I like how this kind of fits in with the trend that in one expansion, Games Workshop is going to introduce a new strategy, and then over the next couple of expansions, they're going to make that strategy a little bit stronger, and then as that strategy kind of gets to its zenith of power, Games Workshop tends to release cards that directly counter that strategy, and I think this is a direct counter to the kind of defensive keep away type of strategy. Whoops. Get back here. Alright, Hidden Paths. It's a little ironic that this particular card was where I had that issue on. Choose a friendly fighter that hasn't made a move action this phase and is on any edge hex. Place him on any other edge hex. They are considered to have made a move action. Okay, so this is the Pacman card. This lets you, it's lucky that I'm using the board as a backdrop here. It lets you just go from here to bloop, over here. Or bloop, way up to the other side of the board. Or bloop, out of danger. This is really strong. And I think it's going to be a direct counter to the use of Denial and Contained. I think it's going to be a direct counter to defensive decks that are going to capitalize on their distance to you. I think that this is going to help people score things like Swift Advance or Last Stand, not Last Stand, Plant a Banner, or Plant a Standard, I think it's called. And also keep in mind that, yes, parts of this card's verbiage are a little bit onerous, because you have to have not made a move action and already be on an edge hex. So if you happen to be somewhere around here, you're going to have to get onto that edge hex by push action from a ploy, or some other faction. Otherwise, some other fashion. Otherwise, you would have to spend a turn, walk up there, then next turn, use Hidden Paths to teleport to wherever it is you want to be. But then you can't move again. You're kind of stuck there. But that being said, take a look at this board right here. All three of these starting hexes here are considered edge hexes. And unless there happens to be another board over here or right here, this, and this would, or sorry, right here as well. This, and this are all considered edge hexes. So you could just straight up deploy there, and at the end of turn one, bloop, you're in the back of your opponent's field, and now they have to deal with you. I'm not seeing a lot of downsides to this card, except that it's somewhat finicky about the way that you deploy it, and the fact that once they get over to the other side of the board, they are considered to have made that move action. This is also going to be fantastic for slower warbands to get them into the enemy lines. For example, if you're playing, say, Fire Slayers, and you're playing a defensive faction, which most factions tend to become defensive when faced with Fire Slayers. Picture in your first turn, you start off with Fuel Grimnir right here in the back of your board, and your opponent is wondering just what it is you're doing. Um, first turn you play Inspiration Strikes to inspire him, and at the end of that turn, bloop, you use Hidden Pass to teleport him right into your opponent's backyard, and they've got an extremely angry dwarf right up in their grill pieces, and then you don't care that he's only got 2 movement. Downside of that strategy is he's going to be all alone, so he better up and kill everybody by the time his buddies waddle up there. Invisible Walls. All fighters' move characteristics are reduced to 1 for the next activation. Okay, that's cute. It's another kind of standard, I'm going to try to ruin one of your activations type of card. And as I've said about these before, and I don't think that this bears that much more discussion beyond what I've already said, using this card well is going to be entirely based around your ability to predict what your opponent is doing. And that's, again, one of the factors that I think separates an okay player of Shadespire from a truly great player of Shadespire. This is going to be very strong against, for example, Skaven, to punish them for their positioning by taking away their biggest advantage, which is their movement. It's going to be great to catch up to Farstriders who are trying to get away from you. It's going to be great to shut down Blood Reaver decks from that initial charge in the first turn. Yeah, it's pretty solid. I don't know that I necessarily consider it better than many of the other kind of counter plays that exist within the game, but it's up there. Mischievous Spirits. Taking it in turns with your opponent, starting with you and going clockwise, move each objective 1 hex. Objectives cannot be moved into a hex that already contains an objective. Huh. Okay, so we have seen shifting shards before, which I think was very popular in the meta in early days, and has kind of fallen out of favor just because there's so many other great ploys that can be used in a deck now. This is kind of an upgraded version of that because it's going to affect every single objective. Here's the issue. It has to affect every single objective. You do not get the choice to not move an objective. This is going to be an excellent card if you happen to be playing a deck that does not care about objectives, which I think is increasingly rare these days. This is a direct counter to Fire Slayers, as if there weren't enough already. If played in the 4th activation of any given turn. This is a counter to Supremacy, again, if played in the 4th activation of any given turn. I consider this mostly, though, because of its global effect, I think that this is purely intended to be kind of a hedge against objective gameplay in order to keep non-objective or non-token objective factions from, or warbands or deck style strategies from being completely outclassed by the comparatively higher number of glory points that you can get from a more objective focus. But again, because it's global, I think this would be somewhat difficult to really get the most use out of if you yourself are trying to go for objectives. I think it's interesting to look at one tiny bit of design here. Um, this line right here, taking in turns with your opponents, um, that completely changes how this card works. If this card were possibly if this card were to work something like Earthquake, where you just chose a single direction, or you yourself moved all of the tokens, this would make it useful for any faction that themselves wants to get on objectives. But the fact that your opponent um, is going to also be able to ruin your plans by choosing one of your objectives and then moving it out from under one of your character's feet. That's going to make this more of an even playing field, and the only way to cheat this particular system is going to be to use it in a deck where you do not care about objectives. My turn. Play this after an attack action or ploy that damages a friendly fighter. Push them up to 1 hex and make an attack action with them. Oh. Oh my. Okay, so excuse me, it's already a given that I'm going to be unreasonably excited about anything that gives you an attack action out of sequence. The getting the free push to deal with knockback or to put yourself in a better position is just icing on this particular cake. No, actually, I think it's more than icing, because if that wasn't there, this card may end up being kind of useless. I like this as a kind of a surprise version of Rebound, because there's no chance involved with this. You're gonna make the attack, and your opponent's not going to know about it because this is a ploy. Also, keep in mind that as a reaction, this is going to work well with the objective that rewards you for killing somebody with a reaction. And again, we find this kind of pattern where GW creates an interesting new strategy within the meta, builds it up, and then gives you a counter for it in the same breath. This is going to be kind of a counter for chip damage, for any faction that's going to be based entirely around, or any strategy that's going to be based entirely around doing like 1 damage, or overwhelming somebody with chaff. This is kind of a nod to your big one-shot guys, your Oberyn, as shown on the card, Severin, Fuel Grimnir, Gerzag, Garrick, all that stuff. Yeah, I like it. There's not a lot bad here. I wish I had 2 of it. That's the only bad thing I can say about this card. Reflected Injury. Choose a friendly fighter with at least 1 wound token and an adjacent enemy fighter. Enemy fighter suffers 1 damage. Not bad. I like that there's an orc on the art for this one. Because this seems to work very well with Shardgale, which is definitely going to be used with orcs. I like that this is going to be a good way to get that extra bit of damage to turn a wound into a one-shot kill. This goes right along, I think, with Trap, Twist the Knife, and other cards like that. Again, very strong in any kind of like tough, aggressive deck. For example, Stormcast Liberators, Ironjaws, Magore's Fiends. Yeah, again, this is a very solid, stable card, I think. This could probably show up in most aggressive decks. That is, if you have a situation where 1 damage is going to do you a lot of good. Now, if you're playing Shardgale, which I definitely think is a good call for your more aggressive decks, this is going to be very easy to pull off, because you could just say, for example, if you're dealing with chaff, you could just walk up to your enemy chaff unit. You won't even have to charge, or you just wait until they attack you. You've already thrown down shard gale, so they're down to one, and you can just drop this to kill them without even deigning to waste an action on them. The more I look at this, the more I think this is an anti-chaff card, and I like it. Second Wind. Choose a friendly fighter that made a charge action this phase. In the next activation, they can be activated as if they had moved rather than charged. Okay. So this isn't going to get you a second move. And it's not going to get you a second charge. What it will do is get you a second attack. Which, if you've got a character like Fuel Grimnir here, or somebody that represents a major part of the power of your expansion, getting extra utility out of them in one turn is a huge benefit. In fact, I kind of feel like this is a bone that GW is throwing to people that want to do a Voltron build, because one of the biggest problems of the Voltron build is you're only getting one charge per turn, and it becomes difficult to get your full efficient benefit out of that extremely upgraded unit when they're subject to the only one move per turn, or you can't attack after you charge, so on and so forth. I think you also have to consider, though, that when you charge somebody, people typically see that as that unit is now very vulnerable. If, for example, whenever somebody charges into my territory with an important unit, say Blooded Sake, Garrick, their leader, Fuel Grimnir, whatever, and they're stuck there having charge, I typically view them as harmless for that turn, and I usually try to gang up on them and kill them. This is kind of a hedge against that. Now, that being said, I think this is probably going to end up getting used immediately as kind of like a mini Sake Bomb, where you charge, get the big hit. Your opponent has the next turn, and then at the end of that pull, you immediately play this and go ahead and get your second attack out of it. And I think that's how this is usually going to be done. You're going to get your most effect out of this, you're going to want to charge into situations where you're going to be up against two, which can be dangerous. Preferably two that have already moved for the turn and are not going to just walk away from you. Because I think when you see your opponent charge their important unit into an outnumbered situation, a smart player is going to realize that you're probably going for a second wind, and they're going to try to counter that. If you see that situation, you should try to counter it, because charging into a situation where you're outnumbered, unless you've got some other trick up your sleeve, is a bad idea. Tainted Vitality. Remove one token from each fighter who has at least one wound token. Alright, so this seems to function as the polar opposite of Shard Gale. This makes everything on the board less lethal. This is going to forcibly slow the tempo of the game, which is good if your strategy is vulnerable to tempo. For example, let's say you're playing a Cataphrane deck. Or for whatever reason your deck is only really strong in the third turn of the game. Based on personal playstyle, though, I despise this card, and I don't ever want to see it. That's not to say it's a bad card. It's just I don't like it because it works counter to all the strategies that I like. But that's not how you make a game, so... other ways in which this is going to be useful. If you are playing orcs, for example, and you like the everybody gets inspired mechanic of Shard Gale, but you don't want the increased lethality that comes with it, you can immediately follow up Shard Gale with this. If you are playing a defensive-oriented deck, this card has you written all over it. Because it's just going to annoyingly keep all of your guys just slightly more difficult to kill. This is also going to be a counter against if your opponent just uses Shard Gale to increase the lethality of the board state. Yeah, I will probably never use this card myself, but it's definitely a strong card. Teamwork. Reaction. Play this card during a friendly fighter's attack action before rolling any dice. Push another friendly fighter 1 hex. I like how Magore's Fiends here just looks so happy. Like, this picture right here just makes me want to call them Magore's friends. Anyway, that was a bit of a side. Okay, so teamwork makes the dream work. I like this. This is the most efficient way to use this is going to be to set up one attack in which you're going to have a support bonus, and then set up the second attack where the person that you just moved into place also gets an attack with a support bonus. Excuse me. Only downside of this is going to leave you with possibly too much overlapping board control in a single area, which again is an admittedly very minor complaint about this card. I quite like it. I like any sort of movement shenanigan in general, and this is, while this is a very situational and a very directed movement shenanigan, considering it's based all around doing an attack, I'm all for it. Okay, and that finishes us off. So while we saw in Farstriders expansion there were a lot of big, huge shakeups to the meta, this was kind of the maintenance for that, I believe. This was a lot more staple cards. I don't think there were any cards in this particular set that I thought were bad. They were all kind of refinements to existing strategies as well as balance changes just by dint of these things existing in the meta. And I think overall this is just this perfect closure to this first season of Warhammer Underworlds. As a matter of fact, we'll be doing a video pretty soon on looking at this season of Warhammer Underworlds as a completed work, and looking back over this entire card set and seeing where their overall strategy seems to have been going from a design standpoint. But yeah, this set of cards is exactly in line with that. I like how they've arranged things. I think this is making the meta of the game really exciting. And at this point, all I can do is just look forward to seeing what people do with these new tools that they've been given. I'm very interested in hearing your collective viewpoints. Please comment down below. Let us know what you think. And also, please like, share, and subscribe for this video and channel. It helps us a lot in bringing you more Warhammer Underworlds content. In the meantime, and until the next video, have a good one.